the Turtle Island Liberation Front is looking for reparations and land back for these indigenous groups in which the land was usurped.
America, the FBI just stopped what would have been one of the deadliest domestic terrorist attacks in recent history. 4 members of a radical far-left extremist group called the Turtle Island Liberation Front were arrested in the Mojave Desert on Friday while testing explosive devices they planned to detonate at multiple locations across Los Angeles on New Year's Eve. A 5th suspect was arrested in New Orleans for planning a separate attack. These weren't just protesters with signs. These were trained bombers with detailed attack plans, chemical precursors, and the intent to kill as many Americans as possible.
Federal authorities say they disrupted a credible terrorist threat over the weekend, arresting 4 alleged members of a radical pro-Palestinian extremist group accused of planning coordinated New Year's Eve bombings in Los Angeles.
What is up, guys? TYSON DELACRUZ here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. This story should be dominating every news channel in America right now. We came within days of a coordinated terrorist attack on American soil, and the mainstream media is barely covering it because it doesn't fit their narrative about who the real terrorists are. Let me break down who these people were and what they were planning. The 4 suspects arrested in the Mojave Desert are Aubrey Eileen Carroll, 30 years old, Zachary Aaron Page, 32 years old, Dante Anthony Garfield, 24 years old, and Tina Chin Ting La, 41 years old. All are from the Los Angeles area and are members of the Turtle Island Liberation Front.
The FBI told Fox News Digital that the members self-identified as part of a radical offshoot of the Turtle Island Liberation Front, also known as TILF, an extremist group motivated by pro-Palestinian anti-law enforcement and anti-government ideology.
Now, what is the Turtle Liberation Front? According to the FBI, it is a radical extremist group motivated by pro-Palestine and anti-law enforcement and anti-government ideology. They call themselves anti-capitalist and believe in using violence to overthrow what they call illegal empire. Their Instagram account, which is still up, by the way, says their goal is to free Turtle Island from American control. Turtle Island is the indigenous name for North America that these radical leftists have appropriated to justify their terrorism. Their posts say things like death to America, long live Turtle Island and Palestine, and death to ICE.
Was preparing to conduct a series of bombings against multiple targets in California beginning on New Year's Eve.
Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Department of Justice and the FBI prevented what would have been a massive and horrific terror plot. These weren't amateurs, guys. They had detailed plans, they had materials, and they were just days away from executing coordinated bombings across Southern California. In November 2025, the ringleader, Audrey Carroll, created a detailed bombing plot called Operation Midnight Sun that included step-by-step instructions to build improvised explosive devices and listed multiple targets across Orange County and Los Angeles. According to the federal complaint, Carroll and her co-conspirators plan to use explosive devices to attack 5 or more locations across Southern California on New Year's Eve. The targets were described as logistics centers. Think Amazon-type distribution facilities. The plan was for these bombs to explode simultaneously at midnight on New Year's Eve when the facilities would be full of workers. Carroll made her intentions crystal clear. She said, and I quote, "What we're doing will be considered a terrorist attack." She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't some protest that got out of hand. This was premeditated terrorism designed to kill Americans and destroy American businesses. And it gets worse. Carroll and Page also discussed plans to follow up attacks after the bombings. They wanted to target ICE agents and vehicles with pipe bombs. Carroll stated that those attacks would take some of them out and scare the rest. Think about what this means. These terrorists weren't just planning one attack. They were planning an ongoing campaign of violence against federal law enforcement officers. They wanted to kill ICE agents for doing their job and enforcing immigration law. The 4 defendants formed an even more radical fraction within the Turtle Island Liberation Front called the Order of Black Lotus. Carroll described this group to her co-conspirators as everything radical. This was the inner circle, true believers who were willing to actually carry out the violence that the larger group talked about. Throughout early December, the co-conspirators discussed their plans during in-person meetings in Los Angeles and through encrypted messaging apps. They purchased multiple pieces of bomb-making materials and discussed their travel plans to the Mojave Desert to test their explosives. On Friday, December 12th, the defendants took a significant step to carry out their plans. They traveled to a remote campsite in the Mojave Desert and began unloading their bomb-making materials to assemble and test bombs.
The agency said the 4 were arrested in Lucerne Valley, where they were believed to be preparing to test explosive devices ahead of the planned attacks. They have each been charged with conspiracy and possession of a destructive device.
The FBI had been watching them the entire time. They had surveillance planes overhead recording everything. They had SWAT teams, special agent bomb technicians, evidence response teams, and the FBI's elite hostage rescue team staged in the desert waiting for the right moment. When the terrorists started setting up their bomb-making materials on tables in the desert, the FBI moved in and arrested all 4 suspects without indictment. They had everything they needed to make operational bombs at the location. They had chemical precursors, the equipment, the details, instructions to build pipe bombs. The FBI stopped them before they could assemble functional explosive devices, but they were literally within hours of having working bombs. Shortly after the arrest, the FBI executed multiple search warrants at the defendants' residence in Southern California and other locations throughout the country. What they found proves this was a sophisticated, well-planned terrorist operation. In Audrey Carroll's residence, law enforcement found multiple posters and materials associated with the Turtle Island Liberation Front, including posters stating "Death to America," "Long live Turtle Island and Palestine," and "Death to ICE" and Turtle Island Liberation Front. In Zachary Page's residence, they found a copy of detailed bomb attack plans, so both ringleaders and her top lieutenant had copies of operational plans.
The FBI served a search warrant at this home in Glendale Friday, where neighbors say one of the suspects, Tina Lay, lived.
It's definitely terrifying considering that we have kids who play out here on the street.
This wasn't some fantasy that they were just talking about online. This was a real plot with written instructions and assigned roles. The FBI also recovered electronic devices and digital evidence that will likely reveal the full extent of the conspiracy and whether there are additional co-conspirators who haven't been arrested yet. Each of the 4 defendants is charged with conspiracy and possession of unregistered destructive devices. U.S. Attorney Bill Asili said they intended to file additional charges in the coming weeks as they finish reviewing the evidence. All 4 defendants are being held without bail and made their initial court appearance on December 15th at a federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. They face up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Now here's where the story gets even more concerning. The FBI announced a 5th individual believed to be connected to the same extremist group was arrested in New Orleans for allegedly planning a separate attack. Think about what this means. This wasn't just a Los Angeles cell planning one attack. This was a coordinated network with members in multiple cities planning simultaneous attacks across the country. If the FBI hadn't infiltrated this group and stopped them, we could have had a terrorist attack in Los Angeles and New Orleans on the same night. The New Orleans suspect's identity hasn't been released yet, and we don't know the specific target of that planned attack, but the fact that there was a separate cell planning a separate attack shows how organized and dangerous this group really is. This is exactly what Tulsi Gabbard has been warning about, the director of national intelligence. She's been sounding the alarm about domestic terrorist threats and the need to take these extremist groups seriously.
18,000 known or suspected terrorists entered the United States during the Biden administration.
Tulsi Gabbard revealed that 18,000 known or suspected terrorists entered the United States during the Biden administration. Let me repeat that. 18,000. That's roughly half of the capacity of a Major League Baseball stadium. That is 18,000 people with ties to jihadi groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
These are individuals who under normal circumstances would never be allowed to enter our country.
But the Biden administration's open border policies just let them walk right in. And here's what she said that keeps her up at night. Of those 18,000 known or suspected terrorists, her deepest concern is that there's so many more that we're not even aware of yet. These are just the ones that we know. How many more are out there that we haven't identified?
We are seeing a wide array of very dangerous threats that emanate from the border. There is a particular network that has where some of the overseas facilitators of the smuggling network have ISIS ties. that we're very concerned about and that we've been spending an enormous amount of effort with our partners investigating.
Even Joey B's own FBI director, Christopher Wray, warned about this. This, my friends, is the reality that the Biden administration created. They opened the borders, they stopped vetting people properly, and now we have terrorist sleeper cells operating inside the United States. The Turtle Island liberation plot is just one example of what happens when you prioritize political correctness over national security. Now, let me try to connect the dots to what happened just 2 days ago in Australia, because there's a pattern here that everyone needs to understand. Alleged ISIS-tied Muslim terrorist walked around and massacred at least 15 Jews in the deadliest shooting in Australia since 1996. And what was the Australian government's response? Within 24 hours, they were already talking about tightening gun laws even more, because that's always the solution, right? Punish law-abiding citizens instead of addressing the real problem: radical Islamic terrorism and failed immigration policies. The Prime Minister of Australia was telling people 90 days ago to stop being Islamophobic. He was more worried about people's feelings than about terrorists who were planning to murder innocent civilians. And now 15 Jews are dead because progressive politicians care more about appearing tolerant than protecting citizens. This isn't happening in a vacuum. Look what's going on in Dearborn, Michigan. Look what's happening in Somalia, Minnesota, where Governor Tampon Tim Walz has the audacity to say that we're going to let more Somalians in after billions of dollars were stolen from taxpayers through welfare fraud schemes. What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sit here in silence while this happens? We're supposed to not be vocal about the pattern? Listen, guys, I don't care what religion you are, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever. If you come to America, you assimilate. You love this country. You make it safer. You create jobs. You adjust to our standards. You bring crime down. If you don't do that, I don't care where you come from. But if you look at the data, I'm talking about real data, not manipulated statistics that the leftist lamestream media want you to see. You see what happens when certain communities refuse to assimilate. They create parallel societies that reject American values. And then you can't sit there and pretend that it's not a problem. You know what works? Look at Poland, for example. Their government said it in parliament. They take 0 refugees from Muslim countries. 0. And guess what? They have the lowest unemployment, lowest crime, lowest stabbing rates, lowest everything bad in Europe. Meanwhile, look at what's happening in the UK. Look at what's happening in Australia. Look at what's happening in major American cities. These beautiful places are being destroyed by policies that prioritize political correctness over citizen safety. The Turtle Island Liberation Front terrorists weren't refugees or immigrants. They were homegrown American radicalized by far-left ideology. But to me, the pattern is the same. Progressive politicians refuse to acknowledge threats because doing so would contradict their worldview. They would rather let Americans die and be stolen from than admit that they were wrong about open borders, about defunding the police, about coddling extremists. The investigation was initiated in part due to the September 2025 executive order signed by President Trump to root out left-wing domestic terrorist organizations like Antifa and groups like Turtle Island Liberation Front. President Trump made it clear that these recent attacks have highlighted the grave threats posed by these far-left domestic terrorist groups. These threats are sophisticated. These threats are organized campaigns of targeted intimidation, radicalization, threats, violence designed to silence opposition, limit political activity, and prevent the proper function of society. In direct response to the president's order, Attorney General Pam Bondi issued a memo to federal prosecutors implementing and mobilizing federal law enforcement to prioritize and counter domestic terrorism and political violence investigations. As a result of those directives, that is where they built this case. This is what happens when you have leadership that takes domestic terrorism seriously instead of pretending that it doesn't exist or making excuses for it. America, the FBI stopped what would have been one of the deadliest domestic terrorist attacks in recent history. 4 far-left extremists were arrested in the Mojave Desert while testing bombs bombs they planned to detonate at multiple locations across Los Angeles on New Year's Eve. The fifth suspect was arrested in New Orleans, planning a separate attack. These weren't protesters. These were terrorists with detailed attack plans, bomb-making materials, and stated intent to kill Americans and federal law enforcement officers. They called their plan Operation Midnight Sun and said explicitly, what we are doing will be considered a terrorist act. The Turtle Island Liberation Front represents everything dangerous about far-left extremists in America. They hide behind social justice language while planning mass murder. They claim to be fighting for indigenous rights while plotting to kill innocent Americans. They wave Palestinian flags while building bombs to blow up American businesses. Director Tulsi Gabbard warned us that 18,000 known or suspected terrorists entered the United States under the Biden administration. The Turtle Island Liberation Front shows that the threat isn't just from foreign terrorists. It's homegrown radicals radicalized by far-left ideology that teaches them America is evil and violence is justified. So here's the reality that nobody wants to say out loud. We're not dealing with a few isolated extremists anymore. We're dealing with organized terror networks operating on American soil, planning coordinated attacks and waiting for the right moment to strike. The only reason Los Angeles isn't cleaning up body parts right now is because President Trump signed an executive order that gave law enforcement the tools to actually go after these groups. But my question is, how many more cells are out there? How many more Operation Midnight Suns are being planned right now while progressive politicians tell us the real threat is coming from MAGA supporters? Let me know what you think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.